Brewster is leaning up against his taxi as he watches passengers disembark the latest ship into port. For the past 5 years, he's seen countless people coming into town to start a new life. Amongst the passengers, he sees a fine-looking young man who's carrying his whole life in 5 bags. The man has stopped to get his documents and passport checked by the customs officer. Brewster shakes his head and smiles. All he sees is another hopeful who doesn't know what he's getting himself into. The officer stamps the man's passport and hands it back to him.
Welcome to America, Norman.
Norman breathes a sigh of relief and smiles at the officer.
Thank you, sir.
Norman looks up ahead of him and sees the taxi rank. Brewster is the only one there, so Norman quickly makes a beeline for his taxi. Brewster isn't impressed by what he sees.
Well, I'll be damned. Here comes another schmuck, trying to become a big movie star.
Norm is a little taken aback by his rudeness.
How do you know I'm here for that?
Someone as young and good-looking as you isn't going to spend 5 days on a ship just to come here as a plumber.
Norm knew that he needed to leave his ego on the ship, and that developing a thick skin was crucial to making it in this town.
Can you please take me downtown to the first motel you come across?
All right, get in.
Brewster opens the driver's door and climbs in, leaving Norman to deal with his 5 bags by himself. Norman opens the back door of the taxi and throws his bags onto the back seat. He then climbs in. Brewster speeds out of the docks. He doesn't give Norman a chance to get settled in the back seat as the back door slams shut.
You know what, boy? I've lost count of the amount of people I have picked up from the docks, only to drive them back a week later because they couldn't handle this town. What makes you think you're any different?
Norman looks at Brewster in the rearview mirror.
Because I've met you and I want to prove you wrong.
Okay, so I'll be taking you back to the docks in 2 weeks' time instead of 1.
Norman decides to have some fun by stirring him up.
No, the next time you'll see me will be on a billboard.
Come on, boy, don't make me laugh. If I see you on a billboard, I'll get your face tattooed on my stomach.
Norman reaches between the 2 front seats and offers his hand to Brewster.
Okay, let's shake on it.
Brewster looks at Norman's hand.
And if I see you in 2 weeks' time?
Norman thinks for a moment.
What does the taxi fare from downtown to the docks usually come to?
Around $6.
All right, if you see me in 2 weeks, charge me triple.
Brewster grabs Norman's hand and shakes it.
You're on.
Norman stands on the sidewalk out the front of a motel as he watches Brewster drive off. He turns around and starts walking up the driveway of the motel complex. Ahead of him, he sees an elderly lady setting up a flower stand. She has a table set up just outside the door to the reception. He thinks it's an odd place to be selling flowers, but there's plenty of people around and she might be doing it so she's not lonely. As he walks up to the reception, the lady looks up from her flowers and sees him.
Hi there, I'm sorry if I startled you.
Not at all, my dear. My name is Ethel. How are you?
Norman puts his bags on the ground and extends his hand to Ethel.
I'm good, my name is Norman Jones.
Ethel reaches out and shakes Norman's hand.
Welcome, my dear. What brings you here?
The film industry. But before you tell me the odds of being discovered, the cab driver from the docks filled me in, and apparently the odds aren't good.
Ethel smiles at Norman and points towards the exit of the motel complex.
No, love. I was actually going to suggest to you that you should go to the producer's bar. It's about a mile down the road. Many hopefuls go there to meet people in the industry. It's not what you know in this town. It's who you know.
Norman's eyes light up.
Well, thank you so much. Once I've checked into my room and freshened up, I'll go there.
I'll be here when you get back, so you can tell me how you go.
The producer's bar. Norman sees it up ahead of him as he walks along the sidewalk. It's actually only 200 yards from the motel. Ethel probably thought it was a mile down the road due to the time it takes her to walk 200 yards. Norman walks through the front door and looks around. The bar is empty. The only people in the bar are 2 barmen. Rather than turning around and leaving, he decides to stay for 1 drink. He walks over to the stools at the bar. He makes eye contact with one of the barmen as he walks.
Hi, barman. Whiskey with 1 cube of ice, please.
Certainly, sir.
Norman takes a seat at the bar while the barman pours his drink. He looks back to the exit. He can see a haze of cigarette smoke floating across the bar. The bar hasn't been empty for long. Whoever was here, he only just missed them. The barman places the glass of whiskey on the bar in front of Norman.
Thank you for that.
Norman reaches up to the glass and takes a sip of his drink.
I recognize that accent.
Norman puts his glass down on the bar and looks up at the barman.
You do? Where do you know it from?
Northern France, 4th of July, 1918.
Norman raises his eyebrows in disbelief.
The Battle of Armel.
What? You've heard of it?
The barman looks as stunned as Norman does.
Of course, my father fought in that battle.
No way.
The barman leans on the bar with his mouth wide open and his eyes fixed on Norman.
Yes, it's true. He sent us a letter that very day saying he met Americans for the first time.
My God, he really was there. That day was the first time many of us met Australians too.
Norman goes to respond, but hears the door to the bar swing open. He turns to his right and sees a group of people enter the bar. All of a sudden, meeting people wasn't important. Right there on the other side of the bar is a man who fought in the Great War like his father, but even more remarkable, in the exact battle.
My name is Roger Coleman.
Norman turns back to the bar and sees Roger with his hand extended out over the bar.
I'm Norman Jones.
He leans in close to the bar and shakes Roger's hand.
You didn't happen to meet my father by any chance? His name was Donald Jones.
No, I didn't meet your father. But let me tell you something. He was extremely brave. To wake up every morning, not knowing if you'll live to see the end of the day, was a huge burden to carry. That's something we all had to deal with.
Norm's demeanor quickly changes. He pauses for a moment as he looks Roger in the eyes.
What was it like over there?
Norm, it was 16 years ago, and I'm still having damn flashbacks. I don't know when it's going to end. Just last week, I heard a car backfire in the street. I fell to the ground and covered my head. That's how bad it was. How did your father cope when he returned home?
Norm breaks eye contact with Roger and slowly looks down at the floor.
He never returned home. That letter was the last contact we got from him. His body is buried on French soil.
Norm, I'm so sorry to hear this.
I lost count of the amount of arguments I had with my mother about my decision to come here to America. She didn't want me to leave. And she certainly wasn't impressed when I told her my reason for coming was to become a film legend. Subconsciously, I just needed an impossible goal to pursue to take my mind off losing my father. I guess the grieving never stops.
Norman stands up from his stool and takes out his wallet. He goes to pay for his whiskey.
Put your wallet away, Norman. This one's on me.
Norman makes his way back to the motel. This time the 200 yards feels like a mile. He barely hears the noise of the city as he walks with his head to the ground. His mind is plagued with thoughts of war. He can't help thinking about what Roger told him, about how his father was brave. He wonders whether he'd still be alive today if he wasn't. But he knows for a fact that his father wouldn't have been able to live with himself if he wasn't. Norman turns into the driveway of the motel complex. Ethel sees him as she packs up her flowers.
The long face tells me that you didn't meet anyone.
Norman looks up and sees her holding a bunch of flowers.
You're right. I didn't meet anyone. I only talked to the barman.
Ethel feels sorry for him and decides to give him a helping hand.
Don't be sad, my dear. I know someone you can meet.
Yeah? Who's that?
Ethel grabs Norm by the hand.
Come with me. I'll take you to my home.
Ethel leads Norm to her house, which is just around the corner from the motel. Once she has Norman in her house, she puts him to work. She gets him to rearrange the furniture in her lounge room. She also makes him change the light bulb in her bedroom. She even makes him fix the leaking tap in the kitchen. It takes Norman an hour and a half of being Ethel's handyman before he speaks up.
Hey, Ethel, I thought you said you had someone for me to meet.
Ethel appears in the kitchen doorway holding a photo of a young woman.
I do, Norman. You had to earn the right to meet my granddaughter, Connie.
2 days later, Norman meets Connie at a burger bar. He can't believe his luck. Connie is beautiful. He never would have had the courage to talk to her if Ethel didn't set them up.
How's your milkshake, Normie?
Norman takes a sip of his milkshake.
It's the best one I've ever had.
It must be really yummy.
Norman smiles at her.
No, it just comes with a great view.
Connie quickly looks down at the table and blushes.
You're the first person to call me Normie on a first meeting.
Connie looks back up at Norman.
You don't like it?
I love it. You must feel comfortable enough around me to say it.
Connie smiles at him. Norman feels an overwhelming urge to lean over and hold her hand. He goes to move his hand across the table, but a waiter appears and puts a basket of fries down between them. Norman looks up at the waiter.
Thanks a lot.
Norman looks down at the table and reaches out to grab a chip.
So, what do you do for work, Connie?
I do the bookkeeping at George's, my father's liquor store. I always wanted to be a nurse, but my father needed me to help at the store when my mother died.
You're a good daughter. I know what it's like to lose a parent, so I know how tough it would have been on you.
Who did you lose, Norman?
I lost my father in the Great War. I thought by coming to America to pursue a career in the film industry would help take my focus away from losing him. But ever since I arrived, I've found myself thinking about him more than ever.
Connie reaches over the table and puts her hands on Norman's to comfort him.
Perhaps an element of homesickness is giving you a new sense of grief.
Norman sits in silence, thinking about what Connie just said to him.
I think the longer you go without work, the worse this is going to get. So, I'm going to introduce you to my father. Being in business, he knows a lot of people, so he may be able to get your foot in the door. I'll be seeing him later today, so I'll talk to him.
It's Saturday, Norman's first weekend in Los Angeles. Connie made arrangements for Norman to meet her father, Graham. Being an avid golfer, Graham booked himself and Norman a tee time at the golf club he's a member of. It's been a long day out on the course for the pair. Being Norman's first time playing the game, he struggled all day, but it didn't stop him enjoying himself. The two of them are finally making their way to the 18th tee, after being out on the course for 5 hours.
I have to admit, Graham, with the right company, the game of golf isn't too bad, even if you are bad at it like I am.
Well, my friend, I hope this has given you the appetite for it. You just need to come out more often to improve.
Yeah, I will. I might even bring Connie out with me next time I play.
This stops Graham in his tracks. Norman stops and looks back at him.
Connie can't play.
Norman looks perplexed.
How come?
Women aren't allowed to play. That's why it's called golf. Gentlemen only, ladies forbidden.
Graham looks back at Norman with a straight face. Norman raises his eyebrows at Graham.
Really? Is that what golf stands for?
Graham smiles and starts walking again.
No, Norman. I'm just messing with you. That's what men tell their wives when they want to get away from her for a few hours.
Norman laughs.
That's a good tactic.
The two of them reach the tee block of the 18th hole. The group in front of them have just finished hitting their drives and have started walking after their ball. Graham turns to Norman.
So, Norm, you never told me where in Australia you're from.
I'm from a town called Port Augusta. It's about 5 hours north of Adelaide in South Australia.
That makes Graham's ears prick up.
South Australia. That's where Penfolds Winery is.
Yeah, it is. I can't believe you've heard of it.
My father started stocking Penfolds in our liquor store in 1919. However, the alcohol ban that was introduced a month or two later put an end to his dream of selling any bottles.
There was a ban on alcohol?
Yeah, it was illegal to have anything to do with alcohol in this country for 13 years. My father started selling bread and milk in an effort to keep money coming in. I took over the store in 23 to try to take the stress off him, but it was too late. He never recovered.
Graham takes his hat off and looks up to the cloudless sky. Norman stands in silence as he looks on.
Damn, Graham. Your family has had it tough. Connie told me she also lost her mother.
Yeah, poor Connie. She had to put her dreams on hold to help out in the store when we lost her.
Connie arranged for the two of them to meet in the hope her father could help out Norman, but Norman now feels that he could actually help him and Connie.
Is there anything I can do to help your situation, Graham?
There is. The timing of you meeting Connie couldn't be better. A good friend of mine has started producing iced coffee, and he wants us to sell it in our liquor store. He needs someone with a foreign accent for his advertising campaign. Would you like to give it a go?
9 a.m. Monday morning. Norman sits at a desk in a recording studio with headphones over his ears and a microphone in front of him. He reads from a script that Graham's friend wrote out for him.
Introducing the people of America to iced coffee. Don't be fooled by my accent. The coffee is American. It's just loved by everyone. Come down to George's today to grab yourself a bottle.
Those were the words the people of Los Angeles heard over the radio the following week. People flocked to the store and lined up for hours to get themselves a bottle of iced coffee. The line stretched around the corner and down the street. After 15 years, George's finally got itself out of debt, and it was on the back of the incredible sales of iced coffee. Graham and Connie cried for his late father and wife who weren't there to experience it. But they laughed for not only the success the sales brought the store, but also what it did for Norman. The day Norman's face went up on a billboard, job offers constantly came to him on a platter. And unfortunately for one taxi driver, this meant he had to book himself in to get a tattoo. In January of 1945, Norman finally visited his father's grave in the north of France. But not as a tourist. It was as an Australian soldier. Due to being an Australian citizen, he was drafted for the Australian Army to fight in World War II. He was one of the oldest Australian troops without a captain's rank. However, many of his younger comrades looked to him for safety and guidance during the war. They knew that he wasn't authorized to give them instructions which would put their lives at risk, so they gravitated to him rather than their higher-ranked comrades. Norman penned his last letter back home on April 26, 1945.
Dear my beautiful bride, Connie, I'm writing this letter while I sit here in a field of long grass. I can count on one hand the amount of days I could hear birds singing. Today is one of those rare occasions. I'm able to hear myself think. My father's presence is very strong today, too. It gives me a great level of comfort. I miss you so much, Connie. I have cherished the moments I could sit down to write to you. I still can't bring myself to write to my mother. She would be on the first boat over here to strangle me herself if she knew I was here. What she doesn't know can't hurt her, right? I hope to have you in my arms again soon, my love. Your husband, Norman.
The war ended later that year. Norman traveled back to America to be by Connie's side. Graham retired from the liquor store on Norman's return and handed the business over to him and Connie. He hoped that his retirement would allow Norman to get some normality back into his life after the war, given he would have more responsibilities in the business. It worked. Norman adjusted well after the war. Life was pretty cruisy for Norman and Connie. However, that all changed in 1963. This was the year Los Angeles real estate magnate Edward Johnson bought the block next to George's and built a giant liquor store on it. It had a much bigger range of alcohol than George's. It introduced the people of Los Angeles to many different international drinks. It took a lot of business away from Norman and Connie. For the second time in George's history, it has been brought to its knees. Every bill that came in was like a kick in the guts for Norman and Connie. They knew they could only afford to keep the doors open for another few weeks. Norman relied on luck to survive in the war. Now he has to hope for a miracle to survive in business. I'll never forget the day I first set foot into George's. It was 8:30 p.m. on a Friday. I was wearing the suit I wore to my uncle's wedding. I walked through the front entrance and disappeared down one of the aisles. I had $2 on me, enough for a six-pack of beer. I walked along the aisles until I found the beer section. When I found the beers, I grabbed a six-pack off the shelf and slowly walked to the counter. I put the beers on the counter and held my breath as Norm and Connie looked back at me.
How old are you?
17.
Norman smiled at me.
How old are you really?
15.
I put the $2 on the counter. Norman picked up the money and held it in front of Connie's eyes. Connie took the money out of his hand and stood there staring at it.
Just don't tell your parents.
I nervously picked up the beers off the counter and made my way to the exit of the store. I couldn't believe it. I got served alcohol. I didn't tell my parents, but I certainly told my friends at school the following Monday that I got served at George's. The news spread like wildfire. My friends told kids in other classes. They went out and told kids from other schools. Before long, half of Los Angeles kids found out where they could get served alcohol. Every Friday and Saturday night, we'd all go and get alcohol and head off around the city to drink. It was such an incredible time. So many memories were made. Norman and Connie became the cool grandparents of half of Los Angeles. They only had 2 rules for us: not to tell our parents and don't drink and drive. We never did. We didn't want to ruin a good thing. George's was thriving. They had no competition. No other liquor store in the city served minors. Despite the business taking in record numbers, Norman and Connie had trouble sleeping at night. They knew it could all come crashing down and the business could get shut down. One Saturday night in 1965, I went to George's like I did every weekend for the previous 18 months. I walked in the front entrance and seen Norman behind the counter.
Hello, young fella. How are you going?
I'm good, thanks, Norman.
Hey, we have a new beer that arrived in store yesterday. It's Austrian, and it's cheaper than the usual beer you get, so you should give it a try.
Cool, I'll buy a couple of bottles.
I made my way down the beer aisle and stopped where the Austrian beer was. I took a bottle off the shelf and looked at the label.
Good evening, officers.
My heart stopped. I stood there frozen in the beer aisle as 2 police officers walked into the store. From where I stood, I could see Norman behind the counter, but I couldn't see the officers.
The word getting around town is that you're serving minors alcohol. Is this true?
No, officer.
I felt sick. Norman just lied to authorities, and there I was, 17 years of age and standing in his liquor store.
That's interesting, because we've heard reports of children coming into your store. There's no reason for children to come in here.
Before Norman had a chance to answer, I walked up behind the 2 officers holding bread and milk. I put money on the counter and hightailed it out of the store.
Bread and milk?
Yeah, we sell bread and milk. We've been doing so since the 20s.
The 2 officers looked at each other, then back to Norman.
Very well. That explains the reports. Good evening, sir.
This close call with authorities forced Norman and Connie to come up with a new strategy, which would allow them to continue serving the only people who have kept the business operating. They decided that Connie would be in charge of serving minors in the bread and milk section of the store. She would spend her mornings cutting yesterday's loaves of bread in half. She would hollow them out so she could hide bottles of alcohol inside the bread. The task required a little extra work from Connie, but it was worth it. The business didn't skip a beat. It was business as usual at George's and fun times for us. I would walk out of George's carrying a loaf of bread every weekend. But on the 20th of July, 1969, that stopped forever. As we all sat in our living rooms watching the first men walk on the moon, I was celebrating a personal milestone, turning 21. That meant one thing: no more bread. That evening I drove down to George's to buy alcohol legally for the first time. Even though I've been buying alcohol for 6 years already, I couldn't wait to experience what it felt like as an adult. I was sure it felt different. But when I arrived at George's, it was closed. I could see a couple of teenagers at the front of the store peering in the window. I got out of my car and walked to the window. The teenagers walked off, leaving me there peering through the window by myself. There was no sign of Norman and Connie. I was devastated. I wanted them to be the first people I legally bought alcohol from. Unbeknown to me, Norman and Connie were inside the store the whole time and were supposed to be open to trading. However, they were having an important meeting in the storage room out the back. Edward Johnson, the owner of the giant liquor store next door, arranged to meet with them.
Mr. and Mrs. Jones, after speaking to you tonight and seeing the annual turnover of your business, I've been pleasantly surprised by how well you're doing. I thought my store would have been doing much bigger numbers, but that's not the case. Tell me, what is the secret behind your success?
They couldn't exactly tell Edward that they've been selling alcohol to minors for the past 6 years, which has been the sole reason for them still being open. So they could only give him half of the truth.
This store has been in my wife's family for 75 years. We have a long, healthy relationship with most of our customers. The secret is being good, hard-working people for a long period of time.
Well, in those 75 years, your business has no doubt had its share of ups and downs. Tonight, I want to add to those good times.
Edward pulls out 3 pieces of paper from his jacket pocket and puts them on the table in front of Norman and Connie.
I had my lawyer write up this contract. I want to leave it here with you until Friday. I think the offer is very generous. Hopefully, when I return at the end of the week, you will have signed it, and we can finalize the agreement of business acquisition.
Edward reaches over the table and shakes Norman and Connie's hand. He walks out of the storage room, leaving them both looking down at the contract.
Honey, this doesn't feel right. 6 years ago, we were 3 weeks away from closing. We are still open and thriving today because of those kids. If we go ahead with this, the people who saved our business will be the ones who suffer.
Norman looks at the $300,000 figure written on the contract.
I feel the same way, but we're only in this position because we've gone outside the rules. If we get shut down...
Connie reaches out and puts her hands on Norman's.
We own the building, honey. If we get shut down, we'll sell up and retire.
Norman and Connie never sold George's, and they never got shut down. They continued to serve the youth of Los Angeles until their deaths. They're still talked about today. They're the reason why the 60s and 70s are so memorable for a lot of people. Norman and Connie were, and still are, true Hollywood legends.